Yeah,
Hey
10. Here we
Doug,
go.
welcome back for episode 10.
Yeah, we made it. Two
I
digits.
think we're in the elite category where we now have 10 like episodes. Apparently that's just like 10% of all of YouTube. So it looks like we're getting somewhere here.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
So
Okay.
what's been on your mind since we last talked?
Earlier this week, I saw, I don't know if I sent it to you individually or the group chat, but I saw a really good, I don't know if you want to call it interview talk with Peter Schiff and this gentleman, Brent Johnson. I believe he was a fiduciary advisor up in the Boston area. They had about an hour chat talk about just China potential, a lot of the headlines last month between the Chinese spy balloons and the lingering 2 year paranoia of not if, when China invades Taiwan. They basically had a kind of like what we do at our talks, game theory about, if we got to a World War III with, obviously whether it's China or, China US or Russia US, what would that look like? And they went down the rabbit hole of China versus America. And there was, Peter Schiff, being the perma bear he was, took the China side and said, they're basically the world's Amazon. They make everything. They have a lot of debt themselves, but most of, especially like a lot of Africa and America, like we own, or they, yeah, we owe them a ton of money acquired. Debt's $30 trillion, a big part of it. And the Brent Johnson individual made the argument, which before the talk, I probably was in line with this, but afterwards, I was with it more. We're already kind of seeing it with like the Russia-Ukraine war right now. Basically, if push comes to shoves, a lot of ally countries and most of the UN and NATO, et cetera, they go with America because at the end of the day, we got a lot of guns, tanks, and nukes. So it's, even though China has that, it's so basically, I kind of wanted your thoughts on that. Peter Schiff was taking the side that if, not if, when in the next decade, whatever, if America, China get into like a World War III, China is the superpower that makes everything, where America is the superpower with the bank account, for lack of a better word, to back everything. So kind of, I just like 30-second synopsis from that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head when you said the bank account, because we're using America's monetary network, right, which is called the U.S. dollar, tied to petroleum, because petroleum trades in U.S. dollar, right? So the world is using the U.S. Monetary network called the dollar, and people like Robert Breedlove have said this before. People like him and others have said that all of the wars that we've experienced in the last few decades have all been because of the ability to just print money. Oh, you need to go to a war? There's no reason to like sell war bonds that you have to pay back. There's no reason
Yep.
to actually raise taxes, to pay for the war. You can just print some more money and just generate debt, that future people have to pay. A massively consequential decision that is not voted on, and that we've been doing for the last 30 years. If we remind ourselves, one of the reasons that the U.S. went off the gold standard in 1971 is because the U.S. was spending so much money in Vietnam that other countries like, hold on a second, are these guys actually good for the gold that
Yeah.
they say that backs the U.S. dollar? And then I think it was Germany or some other country says, hey, boy, we're coming to get some gold, because we got all these dollars, and hey, you said that each dollar can be redeemed for gold, so we're gonna have to ask for some of this gold back. And I think as that was happening, Nixon got on a podium and said, hey, you know what, this whole gold backing thing, we're just going to like stop doing that, right? And that was in the tail end of the Vietnam War was still going on for a few more years, but that was at the tail end of the Vietnam War, where they had spent an ungodly amount of money. And unfortunately, since that time, there's been a whole bunch of other wars, right? So just imagine if the Afghanistan war, right, which cost U.S. taxpayers, well, I shouldn't say it cost U.S. taxpayers money, right? Because, again, this money was just printed out of thin air. It was just
Yeah.
taken as a debt from the future. But it cost $3 trillion in the last 20 years. Now, imagine if there was no sort of just fiat printing going on, and every single dollar had to be, had to come out of my pocket or your. If you personally had to pay 20% more taxes because the Joe Biden or Obama or whoever it was said that, listen, we need to fight the Taliban, and we need to do this, that, the other, we have to free all the women in Afghanistan, and all whatever horseshit, pro patriotic, pro fuck America, yeah, reason they have for promoting the war. If that came out of like the ordinary American's pocket, Like if they felt it in their pocketbooks, I doubt there'd be any wars. I doubt we would have gone to Iraq. I doubt Afghanistan would have ever happened. I very much doubt the Ukraine thing would have happened, right? Because we've now sent $40 billion of, supplies of like, weapons and equipment and other stuff to Ukraine in the last year. And again, that's money that doesn't come out of our taxes. That I mean, it comes out of our potential future taxes, right? And the way that the money is eventually sort of marked down is through inflation, right? If the money means less because it's just being inflated away in value, then it's fine, right? Because we can just probably hopefully outpace growth for inflation, which is a big bet we're all making. We're just we're not making it. The government has decided to make it for us. So, it really does go back to this idea that you just have all this money sloshing around that you could just invent out of thin air. Then it also enables you to do some really dangerous things, like go to war and not think about, hey, are we paying for this thing, right? And I think this has been one of the central tenets of the anti-fiat, pro-Bitcoin crowd is if we all agreed that we're going to just have hard money, then we are going to want to negotiate a lot more going forward. Where if we if taxpayers had to pay for this Ukraine war, right, U.S. taxpayers, then they would be like twisting Joe Biden's arm, like you fucking go to Russia right now, sit down with Putin, sit down, drag those guys into the room together, and don't come out of the room until there's a deal, right? That's what they would have said. So yeah, I mean, so a lot of this just comes down to the I think very valid philosophical point. Does fiat money enable more wars or not? Right? Because we've seen an awful lot of money being spent on wars the last 3 decades, and that's money that wasn't really paid for. Right? It was just borrowed from the future. And now we're like what 30 something trillion dollars in debt, and there's no sign of slowing down, and there's a debt ceiling crisis coming as well. So I don't know if you had any thoughts about this whole like idea of like fiat money potentially causing wars. Do you buy into that at all, or am I just like am I full of shit?
No, that's actually a good segue because follow up I was going to ask you, like in the talk too between Brent and Peter, they also played another game theory. So, like for example, if basically America and China, whether it was invasion Taiwan or just like, hey, we're tired of your bullshit IOU monopoly, like you said, like where's the gold, where's the backing, etc., and they came for it, would how that mainly affect the U.S. taxpayer, like you were saying, because you and I aren't getting taxed right now. Like for example, Peter Schiff brought up that after World War II, or part of the reason we got out of the depression was World War II. Like I forget the running statistic, like over 1 in 10 factories in America, they just like the U.S. government bought a Ford factory, turned it into like a making bombs and guns and stuff, and then like a lot of people were unemployed and they're just making all this shit. Whether that was good, but people are like, whether or not I support the war, like I have a job right now. Like 6 months ago, my family wasn't being fed, and then this goes to my point. Like I guess like question to your question is, if we went to war, like how would that affect the taxpayer? Because like you said, we're not actually printing money, so it's like
No, we are
if
printing money.
well,
We're
no,
not
no, but
paying. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, sorry, that's what I meant. Like we're not paying; we're just printing money out the ass. Like you said, like 30 trillion. It's like $1 trillion of interest a year. So, in his long-winded point, this historically, war has been a good thing for America. But like you said, there's a lot of evidence that since we've gone off gold, we've just gotten in a lot of patsy Ponzi wars. Because if you can just print money out of the basement, out of the Fed on Burr, what's the incentive for the taxpayer to get behind it? Like war bonds, or like compared to, I don't even know if we raised any war bonds for Afghanistan, but I think even compared
No.
to Vietnam to World War II, it was just like American savings drop off a cliff. But it's like I don't know. I mean, Alex Gladstein talks about this, like even people that are maybe more on the conservative side. Let's just say hypothetically, they started, like you said, round number, raising our taxes 20% for, let's just say, the China America war, because we're on this thread. Imagine if we got a receipt that said, hey, Atif, this is let's just say your $10,000, it went to XYZ, and I could see my $10,000, and I'm like, oh shit, my $10,000 went to a Predator missile that killed 20 kids in a school bus. I don't know if I'm gonna. So it's a weird one too, because it's people, the average American citizen doesn't have a say in it anymore. But it's also too, it's the I feel like both alignments are off. A, we don't have any actual voice in it, and then B, even like in World War II, if you didn't have a voice in it, at least like there was an economic incentive to it. Where now it's like if we got into a war with China, what is the economic incentive? And basically, the Brett Johnson individual, he said the only incentive for America, if not if, but when we kind of go to that war with China, is going to really just show us internationally who our allies are. Which is kind of a shitty way to hit that barometer, but that was basically his point. But I guess to answer your question, they got to the segment that whether we do go to war with China or we don't, there's no real financial win-win for the average taxpayer either way.
No, there isn't. I really hope it doesn't get to a war with China. The whole thing in Ukraine is also going in a really dangerous direction. I think Kamala Harris recently landed in some country and said, "Oh, the Russians are guilty of war crimes," and this sort of escalatory language just makes it really difficult for any talk of sitting down and coming up with some sort of negotiated settlement. Right? This war doesn't seem to really have any end. And Biden was the other day where basically sirens were going off in Kiev, right? As
Yeah.
which was probably just theater. Like there's no way
Yeah.
that Putin was like sending missiles down when like Joe Biden was in Kiev. I really don't think that that's so. This whole like theatrical nature of these visits, and then him standing on some podium and saying, "Well, we're going to be at it for as long as it takes." But what does that even mean? Does that mean like Russia is completely defeated and Putin is like overthrown or killed or whatever? I mean, there's just no talk of like, okay, we need to like come up with some sort of negotiated settlement. Hundreds and thousands of people have already died. There's massive destruction in both the Ukrainian economy and the Russian economy as well, and ordinary people are suffering for this, and there's just no like stepping down from the rhetoric. I think this is going to turn maybe into like a political issue. I don't know if you heard, but Trump went to like East Palestine where this whole
The train,
train
yeah.
derailment thing had happened. And I've said many times on this podcast, I'm not a fan of Trump at all, and I don't particularly care for the guy. But one of the ways that he was messaging, because this was a sort of a press event thing that he was doing, and he was just sort of like trying to get some publicity, which he succeeded in doing. But one of the ways that he was talking about the war in Ukraine is that when he's elected, because he's already assuming he's going to win, when he's elected to power again, he's going to shut down the warmongers, right? So there's a subtle shift happening, right? Because even like the likes of Mitch McConnell and Mitt Romney are saying, the most important thing that we have to focus on as a country is to defeat Russia, right? And then you have Trump coming along saying, listen, these guys are all warmongers, they're all war profiteers, they're all like the Raytheons and all the other weapons manufacturers are really raking it in, because for every dollar that goes to Ukraine, that dollar is going into the pockets of like weapons manufacturers here in America, right? Because the stocks have to be replenished, and well, who's going to replenish them? It's not going to be the Indian manufacturers. It's going to be Americans, obviously, right? So this is almost sort of like a stimulus, check for the sort of the military industrial complex. And this again comes down to like, if you can just print money and you can just like promise to like give it away to like countries for whatever reason. And again, I'm not saying that Ukraine should not defend itself. I'm not, I am highly sympathetic to the Ukrainians, and I think Putin's like a maniac and a monster, and all those things are still true. But those things can still be true, and I can still say that we should push hard for a negotiated settlement. And I can also still say that there's a lot of people in the American government that are more than happy for the war to continue for as long as possible, because if it does, it makes them richer. And to what extent is this a problem of centralized control of our money? Right? I mean, this channel is called Decentralize This, and I think we chose that name because we understand that complicated systems like our political system run better if there's a degree of decentralization that we're currently not seeing. Whereas right now, who's making decisions on, we're just going to send 100 billion to Ukraine, we're just going to invade this other country, right? I mean, these decisions are made by a handful of people. It's not like anyone's like putting this to the vote. It's not even like Congress is giving any authority to the executive branch to go invade a country or to like do a drone strike or whatever. So this sort of centralized control, the amount of control that the executive branch has to just create conflict around the world, I think it's sort of an overused thing. A lot of people in the White House think of foreign policy as just the ability to like rain down drone strikes on multiple countries. So it's a sad state of affairs. And I think a lot of it is tied to money. If Americans literally had to feel that they are paying for it out of their own pockets, whatever job they're doing, 10% of that income is going to fund some weapons manufacturing company or some cause in some part of the world, or setting up for the next war with China over Taiwan, or pick your next battle, whatever it is. If they actually are feeling it themselves and they're like, oh fuck this shit, I'm going to go out and protest, I'm going to write to my congressman, my senator, I'm going to like actually have a say in this, because Americans, just like everybody else in the world, we care about our paychecks more than anything else, or we care about being able to live our day to day with dignity, being able to take care of our family with the money that we make. And as soon as that is threatened, then we're going to start caring very deeply about foreign policy, right? Because it starts affecting us personally. So again, this is where people come up and say, well, Bitcoin would fix this if, we had harder money, and if most of the monetary energy was placed in hard money where you can't fuck around with it, then these sort of problems sort of just take care of themselves, and that's an interesting thought experiment. We've never run that counterfactual before, but that's sort of the argument for why Bitcoin.
Two questions on that. One of them is back to the Peter Schiff, Brent Johnson talk. I know, I assume you would agree with this, but just curious, and Brent agreed with Peter Schiff. He just went on a good like 5 minute rant about this. That one of the biggest problems in politics right now is just there's no real accountability, and the incentive structures are really screwed up. So like we talked about this at the meetups, the president that tries, I don't know if anyone can at this point, if the ship's too far down the river, but the president that tries to actually lower the deficit, you and I both know this, like people think the interest rates the Fed's doing now are crazy, and people think, the loan percentage rate on houses is crazy now. Wait, if some like whether it's not, let's just say it's Billy Bob's next president, right, in 24, and he actually tries to fix this inflation. We go back to Paul Volcker 1970s with like what, double digits, low 12-15% minimum. I mean, like people think stuff's bad now, but it's like that's how it's just like a personal trainer. If you have a good personal trainer, they're going to tell you the pizza and beer, that shit's done for a while. You're on kale and chicken for the next 6 months. But nobody wants to hear that shit, right? So that's what Peter Schiff was saying. It's like, do you think even in the next decade we can start to get real politicians in that are actually going to do what people need, not necessarily what they like, and they're not going to be kissing the ring of big pharma, insert your external force? And then, well, I guess unpack that one first and get to my second thing. Do you think the ship's too far down the river, or do you think like within 10 years we can get like actual, where 1 in 3 politicians is like an Andrew Yang, Tulsi Gabbard, like people on both sides of the spectrum get behind? Or do you think it's politics has kind of always been theater, it's going to continue to be theater?
The optimistic part of me says that I think, there's a phase shift coming. One of the things that attracted a lot of people to Trump, I'm not one of them, just to be clear. But one of the things that attracted a lot of people to Trump is that he was very anti-war, right? He was actually, I don't know if you remember, but he was willing to sit down with the Taliban and come up with some sort of a negotiated settlement with them as well. And then like his like senior White House staff sort of shut that down, and there was a lot of resistance from his inner circle, like, no, we can't do that either. And so that was one of the reasons why Peter Thiel backed him. Peter Thiel, when he was asked, well, why are you backing this guy? He's obviously a lunatic. He says, well, because I like his foreign policy, because he's not going to get us into wars, and he's going to like, and to be fair, he was like the only sitting president that did not recently get us into a new conflict, right?
Which is crazy like, when you think about it, of like all the clowns, yeah, to win that title. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that might have been his only saving grace, but that sort of perspective, I think, is being co-opted by a lot of other Republicans who are asking, like, why the hell are we like doing all these wars? NATO, for example, was set up during the Cold War, where Russia was, the great enemy and was the threat, and we all had to like coalesce against Russia, and we created this NATO. What is the role of NATO in a world that doesn't have Russia anymore? As the Soviet Russian Empire that and Russia today is not a threat at all. I mean, it's decimated. There's nothing left to it. It's an empty shell of what it was. They may have some nuclear weapons, not some, they have nuclear weapons. I personally doubt, although I would never want this experiment to run its course, but I doubt any of them work anymore.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's like, an elite group of like the Russian army that like is really up to speed on like, nuclear technology, and they have been like very diligent, and they've been like really good about keeping up their nuclear arms the last 3-4 decades? I think like everything else in Russia, that's corrupted and corroded away as well. Again, they only have to maintain like 5 nuclear weapons, for them to be any danger at all. They don't need all like whatever 10,000.
Hmm.
But to answer your question, there's a growing sentiment amongst like at least the right wing of the party, the Republican Party, that I keep hearing a lot about, that is a lot more suspicious of not just the media, but sort of the so-called deep state, right? That there's a contingent of bureaucrats inside of the U.S. government that is really the guys in charge. Like they're sort of like, pulling the gears. They're getting the likes of Biden to commit to the whole Ukraine thing, and, they're probably connected to a lot of the weapons manufacturers as well. So there's more and more people protesting about this. There's more and more people like speaking up about this. One of the barometers that you can use to help you appreciate how little people are buying, some of this bullshit anymore, is the fact that the trust in mainstream media is at an all-time low. It has never been so low before. Whereas, I'm a little older than you, so I do remember when this was happening, when the Iraq war was, being rolled out, right? When the public was sort of being prepared for it, like, oh, they have weapons of mass destruction and we have to go invade them. Condoleezza Rice says, we don't want the next warning to be some mushroom cloud, right? But because Iraq, sent some sort of nuclear weapon against America. I distinctly remember that the public sentiment in the U.S. at that time was very much pro-war, and that was because the media got right behind the U.S. administration, like, yep, let's go to war, and most of the public believed the media at that time, because back then there wasn't like, Twitter wasn't as big, there was no Substack, there were no YouTube channels, there was no like countervailing voice to say, hold on, this is bullshit, right?
Yeah, I mean,
But
the
you have
internet
all of
was.
those things now.
I was gonna say the internet was still in its infancy too. It wasn't now.
Yeah.
I mean, the internet's still a lot of bullshit, but like you said, there was like two funnels instead of like 2,000 now. So yeah.
Yeah. So you didn't even have like the phone revolution the iPhone revolution hadn't happened, right? And the
Hmm.
iPhone is really what brought the internet to everyone's like pockets, right? And allowed us to have social media, allowed us to have YouTube, on the go. You could listen to YouTube while you were outside shopping or whatever, right? So I certainly have been a beneficiary of that. I remember a time where we didn't have YouTube in your ear all the time, and you didn't have access to contrary opinions. And now you can find the opinion to suit your bias, right? So if you are looking for evidence or a narrative that says, well, the government is full of bullshit and the mainstream media is lying about everything, you can find that narrative pretty easily. And you have well articulated arguments that explain that position well. You don't have any of those things back in 2004, 2002, or 2003, 2004, when the Iraq War is being sort of revved up and being sold to the public. Now I don't think that I was about to say that, the U.S. government can get away with it, but that's exactly sort of what's happening with the Ukraine thing, right? Now, granted, there aren't American boots on the ground, but there's still American dollars on the ground, right? So there's still involvement, right? The war machine of America is still benefiting to a large degree, to the tune of like $100 billion, right? So one of the things America did is that they sent all their old weapons over to Ukraine. Well, they depleted their old weapons. Now they get to restock them with new ones, right? In the meantime, the Pentagon couldn't, it could not pass yet another audit, right? Which is another
Yeah, it was
thing
like
that
they're short like $1 trillion or 1.3. It was just ludicrous.
yeah, I mean, this is sort of just like clown theater level uh irresponsibility. I mean, like we're playing so fast and loose with money as if like this is just like magic or something, you know? There's some degree of dispersion of responsibility. No one is really like, thinking ahead. I'm like, well, what are we going to do with all this debt 10 years, in the future? And then in the meantime, you have, inflation rearing its head and interest rates are taking a huge bite out of the US budget. How are they going to deal with that? They're going to take on more debt, and the train goes on, right? And I think, coming back to the original point, this is the problem with a highly centralized, monetary system, right, where a few people decide what the money system is going to, how the money system is going to work, and we all just have to follow along. And that's sort of where, bringing it back to Bitcoin, that's sort of, I think the central ethos of the whole Bitcoin community is we need a hard money you can't fuck around with, and you can't, fuck things up with either, right?
Obviously, like we've talked about, it's hard to tell what's even going to happen 72 hours from now, let alone 72 months and moving out. But do you think this could be another catalyst to kind of, for lack of a better word, kick the average person in the ass and be like, hey, this is why we need hard money? It's like everything we just said. We have a couple monkeys driving the car right now. We're just sending blanks amount of money that no one can account where it's going, whether you support the Ukraine war or don't. But the fact, like you said, we sent $100 billion. The Pentagon, which is basically the square military box of the world, cannot count for $1.3 trillion. And it's like none of us have a say in this. And people wonder, like why you said, everyone's drunk and the dog's driving the car. Do you think this could be a catalyst where we look back 5 years and like whether, again, you support or didn't support Russia, Ukraine, we could be like, oh, this was a catalyst to hyper Bitcoinize 5% more people? Or you think it's just too hard to tell right now?
I think it's going to have to affect people's like lives, and again, it's going to have to affect them at the pocketbook. I think like
Mm-hmm.
it's very hard for Americans to care about what's happening in another country. That's just like the fact of the matter. Yeah, I think all countries are like that. It's not like Americans are uniquely selfish, right? I mean, do you think like, Indonesians give a shit about what's happening in the Ukraine, like even if they don't, even if they're not, sending any money over there, it's not like any Indonesian is losing sleep over what's happening. And nobody in Nigeria, gives a crap about what's happening there. And so I don't want to single out like Americans as like being uniquely selfish. I think that it's just going to have to affect them personally, and then they're going to have to like connect the dots between, well, hold on a second, we're spending all this money there. We have these like terrible relations with China where, we're basically super aggressive with them. Can we like come up with a situation where we like get along, like, why is it that, confrontation is like the first go-to? Yeah, where these countries, America is basically just like a giant gorilla, like it thumps its chest, and wants to dominate. Like, is there like some other way to do business? I mean, we've been doing this for the last 80 years. like,
Yeah.
like, is there no other way to like be? Like, we either have to invade, or we have to do sanctions, or we have to do a Cold War, or we, there must be some better way to like run the affairs here, because things are just getting a bit too dicey. I don't know if you saw this, but there was a report recently saying that the Department of Energy, was it the U.S. Department of something, said that they have, there's better evidence than not that the COVID virus probably came from the, China lab, right? So
Oh yeah, they finalized it. Where like 2 years ago that was racist. Yeah, now it's like
that was
hardcore
yeah.
science. Yeah, yeah, I saw that.
Well, I mean, the issue is that the reason I'm bringing it up is that we're living in a world where, some lab somewhere in the middle of the, nowhere can create like a virus that, disrupts the entire economies of
Yeah.
the world for 2 years. And that was presumably an accident, right? What happens if someone decides to do this deliberately? So
Mm-hmm.
we're living in a world now where technology like, biotech, if you can call this a biotechnology, or even artificial intelligence is resulting in potential existential crises, and we need to come up with better systems of engaging with each other as, countries. I think the old paradigm of like, well, it's just nuclear weapons, and as long as nuclear weapons are not fired, everything is game. I think we're past that now, right? I mean, bioweapons are now like the next nuclear weapons, because we saw what COVID did, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it not just, I mean, COVID killed, I think, over 1 million people. I don't know how many millions it killed, but more importantly, it also disrupted the entire world for 2 years, right? It
Mm-hmm.
resulted in all these sort of power dynamics between governments and their citizens, and all these lockdowns. It like crushed economies. It caused us to like print a shit ton of more money. It was literally the most disruptive event of the last 100 years for, the modern world. And that was an accident. Now
Hmm.
imagine if someone decides to do this deliberately. We need to come up with a world. I mean, Putin may have some of this, shit in his backyard, like buried in some bunker, and he's like, "All right, I won't do nuclear weapons, but I got this other smallpox, in the back over
Yeah.
there, genetically modified small. Maybe I'm just gonna put that in park in New York City or something, And it's not like Putin hasn't used chemical weapons or biological weapons before, right? He's done all sorts of heinous shit with that, right? I could definitely see him doing it if he gets defeated. And he's like, well, I'm just going to do this before I go. One last hurrah. So, we really need to come up with like a way where we're not like constantly on the edge of war with one or the other country. This is just like there's no way to be like we're lurching from crisis to crisis to crisis. I mean, it's been an exhausting few years. I don't mind telling you.
Well, and a good segue on that. So, like I said, the first question is kind of, do you think politics is more theater? And then the second one is, it was kind of back to the Peter Schiff, Brent Johnson talk. It was like, what is it? Is there like a win scenario in this U.S. versus China thing, or is it a lose lose? And to your point, like on just like it's I always like joke about this, but I feel like with anything in life, I feel like especially one thing I agree with you with about like how Americans are detached from the rest of the world. Like we're the world's biggest consumers, we're in a big bubble, blah blah blah. But I guess like what you said, it's too. I think Americans are so disattached from stuff. That's part of the reason things have kind of gone so AWOL. Like for example, I think a lot of people, like when Russia Ukraine popped off, they're like, oh man, I can't believe Russia invaded Ukraine like that. They just went over the border, blah blah blah. They expanded, and again, I'm not, uh, I would say I'm confident enough to realize, compared to most Americans, I am very uneducated on the Russia-Ukraine thing. I think you take most Americans, put a gun to their head, they couldn't name 10 Ukrainian cities. I have enough confidence in myself to admit that. I
I
am
can.
I am anti-war in general. I think now we are too, like you said, we are too technologically advanced to be doing dick measuring match. 200 years
Yeah.
ago with muskets, cool, like you said, like with the COVID thing. But I guess to circle it back, it's to the U.S. China thing with the Russia Ukraine thing. Like, is there any win stuff in this? Because a lot of people were wondering, oh, I can't believe Russia invaded Ukraine. Again, I am not supporting Putin or Russia, but if you look at a map of, like you said, NATO, it has just been lurching up to Russia's borders, and it's kind of like a dog in the corner. And and Putin's a very crazy dog right now. There's evidence he's been sick for years, cancer, he has nothing to lose, but we keep pushing up on that, and it's like, what's the win situation right here? We defend Ukraine and have to go to war with Russia, or we tell Ukraine they're on their own and then they get swallowed up. And this goes to my segue point is like you said, like why is America lurching from crisis to crisis, war to war? And it's weird because a lot of, like, for example, the left is like, oh, they hate the U.S. industrial war complex, how we've fucked up parts of South America, Africa, you pick your continent, of poison. But at the same time, the second Russia Ukraine happens, they want us to jump in there. So it's kind of like when you have a police officer or like a rules enforcer, or it's like in sports. People only like the referee when the call goes your way. So it's like that's the thing in America. It's like I feel like we either have to police, for lack of a better phrase, the whole world, or we have to back out of it. And the reason I'm bringing this up is then Peter Schiff and Brent went also down the rabbit hole. It's like, does America have enough fortitude to where, like, let's say we did go against China, and let's just say half of NATO and half our allies did go with China, the other half went with us. Do we have enough good connections around the world over the last 20 or 30 years to kind of survive that? So I guess, like, to condense that into a question, like, do you think if the in the next 10 years the America China bomb does pop off, do you think internally we can self sustain ourselves, and if and or we need external countries to help just keep us afloat? Do you think we have enough tentacles out there to keep the ship moving?
Nope.
Nope.
Absolutely
Yeah.
not.
Well, that's what
We're
Peter
gonna
Schiff
run out
is.
of
Yeah.
we're gonna run out of toilet paper in 2 minutes. That happens. We'll be wiping our ass with grass and leaves, in a week into the war. So no, I have no optimism that America will like do well if we just start a hot war with China. Which, to be fair, I don't think it's going to happen. I think there's a lot of posturing on both sides. I think China needs America as much as America needs China. It will be mutually destructive to both parties we end up, going to a hot war, which I don't think it'll happen, but who knows, man? I mean, like,
Hmm.
it's not like I have some great confidence in our leaders that, oh, no, that's okay. Our leaders are super sensible. They'll do the right thing, right? So it's not like we're past that point. That that moment has come and gone. So I don't really know where this whole China thing is going. I think like the U.S. government has been so distracted with the Russian thing that the whole China thing has sort of taken a back burner. And like China has its own problems. It's the the housing market is still like in a really bad situation. Their economy is slowing down as well. And with China, the population is so big. There's like millions of people entering the job market every year, right? As they get older and they get to a working age, that the government needs to be providing jobs. The government desperately needs the economy over there to keep growing. Otherwise, there's going to be riots. I don't know if you remember, but the very reason that China went and did an about turn with the COVID policy, because they were zero COVID for a long time, and then like just overnight they're like, all right, fuck it, we're just gonna like let COVID take over, was because when they did yet another like lockdown, there were like massive protests. They're like people were just completely sick and tired, and people say, well, like China, the Chinese government just sort of does whatever it wants with its citizen. But as soon as the Chinese government saw these protests, there's like 1.4 billion, 1.6 billion people there. Like 1% of them decide they're really pissed off. That's that's a lot of people.
Yeah, like a little segue there. One thing I do get, I am by no means like a diehard Second Amendment person, but I think when people say like, "Why do you need a gun?" I just like I put you in a box and you're on the shelf. I'm not talking to you because people forget this. I think the problem with like history is very black and white. People forget the British Empire, like the British Empire was called that. They were like the U.S. at the time. They were the bulls in '96. They didn't lose. Some drunk farmers in bumfuck this thing called the 13 colonies. They came over. The British Empire came over, and these drunk farmers in these bumfucking, New Hampshire and Virginia beat them and took their lunch money. So like when people go, oh, you don't need guns in America because internal oppression. It's like if the U.S. government turns on you, and to your point, I'm like, if even 1%, like not even 1% of the population, if like 1% of like diehard conservative rednecks be like, yo, fucking, Coast Guard, bring your SWAT, bring your Marines, like, and same thing too. A lot of people that are in the service, if the U.S. government starts going rogue, they're gonna be like, fuck this, I'm going with the rednecks. To your point, even if 1% of them just like take their guns, these idiots practice shooting every week. They could easily, I think, bat to bat with the U.S. government. And to your point, China, it's like, so what's 1% on 1.5 billion? I mean, you have like what 20 million people storming something. It's a wrap. Like they have that in 2 seconds. To your point, yeah.
Yeah, that's why they did an about turn on COVID, right? And so they're like, okay, like people are getting so fed up here, and because these guys monitor like the socials over there. They have their own Twitter, they have their own social media. That stuff is all just monitored like really carefully, because the government wants to know like what is the sentiment of the people. They don't want to be caught by surprise, right? Because the government saw what happened during the Arab Spring, like in 2011, and or was it 2009? I think it was.
It was around there, yeah.
2009, 2010 is when the Arab Spring happened, and all of these dictatorships that had been propped up for decades just like collapsed one after the other. And they saw that. They're like, shit, people can organize really fast,
Hmm.
with social media if they're given a chance. So they probably have their finger on the pulse of the nation over there, using the AI tools, using social media monitoring. And they're like, okay, listen, people are getting a bit too pissed off, so we're going to have to do an about turn here. That was all. I was bringing all that up in service of your to answer your question about uh, whether or not like there's going to be a hot war or there's going to be any kind of conflict with America and China. The problem is if that does happen, the economy over there is going to just go to dog shit so fast over there. Like over here, it's going to go to dog shit as well, but we'll just elect somebody else. But what are they going to do in China? Like there's no elections there, right? So they're
Well,
just going to riot.
And
against the
and
government.
there's a good chance the Brent, the individual I kept mentioning, because I wasn't even aware of this. It was something north of 80 to 90%. So not necessarily the bulk food, like it's not like it comes in cereal boxes, but 90% of China's food production, they need external materials to come in to make their stuff. Where in America, it's like less than 20%. So that was the thing too. It's
Hmm.
like they'll literally just starve to death. So it's like we could just basically just start strangling them out. And same thing.
Yeah.
Not a big fan of the Chinese government, but back to our point on like if hypothetically we're funding this war, if I went to bed at night knowing like a million people, like 200 million people are starving to death right now because of some weird proxy war, I'm like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a hot war like that, all America has to do is shoot down some oil tankers heading towards China, like, to give them oil. Shoot down some, like, grain tankers. Not shoot down, but, like shoot at some grain tankers and say, listen, anyone who's like supplying food through China through the sea, we're going to sink them to the bottom of the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, you could basically starve China out in like 2 weeks. Now, I'm not saying that that should happen. China has nuclear weapons also. So it's not something you want to like really provoke, which is again why I don't think there's going to be a hot war between them, right? Because it's going to decimate both economies, and both economies have like way too much to lose. And to be fair, China hasn't invaded anything yet, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about like Taiwan, but to be very frank with you, I don't think like average Americans, even know where Taiwan is, right, on a map. They're like no idea, like, and if you ask them, well, why should we care about Taiwan? They're not going to be able to like give you the answer. They're not going to be say, well, they used to be one nation, and then Taiwan was sort of became independent, and and it became a democracy, and I mean they're not going to know any of that stuff. So I don't know. I hope there isn't any sort of conflict with China. God knows I'm really tired of thinking about conflicts abroad. I would really love to just have this country focus on building up technologies and like curing cancer and like space missions and exploring space, looking for aliens. This is the sort of stuff that warms my heart. I hate talking about this other warlike stuff. It just seems like stuff that I wish I didn't have to pay attention to. Even though like I probably have to. It's unfortunately pretty important.
Yeah, I guess like to put a final pin on that, and then we can jump to something else if you want. Do you think, let's just game theory, like 20 years, 10% of Americans own Bitcoin, maybe 10% of their net worth is in it. Like it's something almost as common as like the iPhone. Or you get my point, right? It's not like car, etc. Do you think that would still be enough to change this? Or not saying it's a quality of human nature, but wars are nothing new. I mean, to my knowledge, even like colonies of ants, they make their own odor and they can smell another ant and they'll start going to war with each other. So do you think even if like we get hyper Bitcoinization or it is something else that's not like a tyrannical CBDC, do you think we could get to a point even in our lifetime where like wars just between, like we said, with between biotech and nuclear weapons, like to win a war you literally have to nuke a country to death, so like who's willing to do that? But do you think we could get to like a decentralized finance point where there's enough incentive to like put wars like a thing of the past, or you think it's just kind of part of human nature?
I don't know if like the war. So one of the things that I think isn't talked about often enough is, in terms of like Bitcoin making it big, is what is the influence of Bitcoin adoption in other countries going to be, right? So of course El Salvador is like a country that did Bitcoin, but there's a lot of people like moving to Dubai these days who are crypto related, and I have absolutely no doubt at all that there are some Arab countries that are starting to position themselves into Bitcoin. They're looking at the Russian thing, they're looking at the U.S. and China, and like fuck this, man. Like like these guys are all fighting, but now there's this decentralized money that we could use instead, that is not correlated to the U.S. dollar. So and the Middle East has a lot of money. So
A little
even if
bit,
they
yeah.
decide, even if they decide to put like 1% of their
1%,
money
yeah.
in, Bitcoin could like hit $200,000 just like that alone.
Yeah.
And I think once it hits a certain level, like in this country, even like in the US, once it hits a certain level, people are going to say, okay, it's time to take this seriously. I'm not going to call this like a Ponzi scheme anymore. I'm not going to call it a bubble anymore. It's been around for 13 freaking years. Now it's $100,000. At what point am I going to say, okay, this thing is here to stay, right? So I think if relations, in these other countries, Russia, America, China, America, whatever it is, starts to deteriorate, some of these other countries might decide to opt out of the American monetary network. They're like, listen, we know that this other thing exists, right? It's called Bitcoin. Why don't we just start using more of this, right? And I've said this before in this podcast as well, is that my prediction is that at some point in time, some Middle Eastern country is going to announce that they have Bitcoin on their balance sheet in their sovereign wealth fund, right? All of these Middle Eastern countries have sovereign wealth funds. And one of them is going to declare and says, listen, we've allocated a little bit to Bitcoin. And one of the things about these Middle Eastern countries is that they are very competitive with each other, right? Economically, at least, right? There's a lot of competition, cutthroat competition there. So if anyone, and they're all relatively young leaders as well, like all of them. So the leader of Qatar is very young. Saudi Arabia obviously is very young. Even, the Dubai Emirates, folks, they're not like in the 80s like in this country, right? Or in China, who's Xi Jinping is also like in his late 70s, right? So, or mid 70s, I think. So those are old, but the Middle Eastern leaders are all like relatively young. So I think they are far more open to thinking about, and they're probably sick and tired of watching like America like rule the roost and
Yeah,
everything,
dick
right?
measuring match. Yeah.
So it may be, we keep talking about, well, if the ETF is approved in the U.S., this will happen, and if Gary Gensler gets down with his high horse, then that will happen. But one of the things that people aren't actually watching is like, well, what are these Middle Eastern countries going to do? What are these other countries with capital going to do? Norway is not a good example as well. They have a huge sovereign wealth fund. Or at some point in time, they might like, let's put 0.1% into Bitcoin or whatever, right? Because if that 10x's, then that's like huge windfalls for them. So I think that might be the next catalyst, as opposed to like waiting for an ETF or waiting for the U.S. to like have regulatory clarity. I think maybe that's where the next thing will come from. I mean, I'm growing very. No, I wouldn't, not optimistic. I'm watching the whole Dubai crypto thing with interest. I'm like, oh, what's going on over there? Like, no one's actually talking about how many companies are moving to Dubai. Coin Bureau, who's one of the biggest YouTube crypto channels. Do you know him, or have you seen his
Vaguely.
stuff?
I've seen a couple here and there. Not a big
Yeah, he's
fan,
that
like, to
British.
believe him.
He's that British guy. His name is Guy. Um, he recently moved to Dubai as well. And he's not the only guy who's in Dubai. Like, there's a whole crypto community over there as well, So, and I'm sure like the government is very well aware. Not just aware, they're actually promoting, crypto businesses in their like jurisdiction. So, so I think a lot of that is going to, the next stimulus might come from there. But speaking of our lovely U.S. government and our regulatory bodies. Have you heard about this whole Operation Chokepoint 2.0? Do you have a beat on that at all, or any insights or thoughts on it?
Not really. No, I might be thinking of something else. What is that?
So, so about 2013, there was this thing people called Operation Chokepoint, and at that time, what had happened is that the Fed and the FDIC and like the financial services, there was a few other like bodies as well. They went to the banks and they told the banks that we don't want you doing business with this, that, and the other people because and that time it was like the gun industry, and there was like a few other industries that the Fed and a few other regulatory bodies were not entirely comfortable with, and so. That was officially given a name of Chokepoint. Operation Chokepoint is like, well, we're trying to choke these industries back then by just going to the banks and just cutting off the supply. They didn't say to the banks, listen, if you do this, we're going to throw you in jail. They just threw a whole bunch of red tape at them. They're like, all right, well, you're going to do business with them, then you're going to fill out these 10,000 forms. We're going to need your grandmother's DNA, blah, 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 the whole thing, right? And so, and that sort of ended, I think, a few years ago. It was never officially acknowledged, like, okay, we're doing this operation, no one actually said this is a thing, but people saw what they were doing, and they're like, all right, you're trying to choke off industries here by, just putting up regulatory red tape. And that too, in an unelected manner. Again, it comes back to the idea that, certain bureaucrats are just deciding which industries will thrive and which will not thrive, right? So that's a problem. So Nick Carter, who's a very, well-known writer. He's written a lot of brilliant stuff. He's on Twitter, and, he's also a hedge fund manager. I think his thing is Castle Ventures. He came up with a warning. I'm not sure what it's based on, but he says there's a new choke point going on. He's calling it Operation Choke Point 2.0, where the Fed and a bunch of other regulatory bodies are warning banks that they shouldn't be doing business with crypto companies.
Hmm.
Now the rationale is like, well, if these crypto companies fail, then they're gonna want all their money back, and of course banks are rehypothecating all this money. So if there's a bank run because the money was lost in the crypto companies, and then the crypto companies go to the banks and like, hey, we need our money back, that's going to result in a bank run, and therefore there'll be a spread of contagion from the crypto industry to the banking sector, right? So on the face of it, it makes sense. um, so that is sort of what the whole choke point 2.0 is sort of like about. There's also this very big crypto proponent called Caitlin Long, who is trying to, who actually has a bank called the Custodia Bank, and she's been trying to get like Fed supervision for her bank, which means that she'll have a direct a line to the feds, to the federal bank. Then you have to like apply for that, and then the Fed governors vote on whether or not they're going to give you direct access to the Fed or not. And they voted her down. They're like, no, no, you're not a bank that we feel can regulate risk properly, and the reason is you're involved in crypto, right? Um, so that has been interpreted by the likes of Nick Carter as like, well, this is another Operation Choke Point 2.0, but and I think that's not far off. But at the same time, though, I think like what a lot of these officials are doing is they're trying to like protect. They looked at the 40 billion that was lost in Luna. They saw like the 10 or 15, God knows how much was lost by FTX. Who knows how much was lost there, and the many billions of others that were lost by many other meltdowns that happened in crypto. But
Hmm.
because there were so few banks that were involved with the crypto companies, the meltdown was contained within the crypto sphere. And I think the regulators wanted to keep it that way. They do not want, the banking sector to be exposed to cryptocurrency right now. So I don't really know like how this will resolve. Um, I think that until like there's clear regulation on like how this thing is going to work, it's going to be very difficult to um, really see the industry really take off again, right? Because if you cut off the banking sector, right, if the regulators are saying this stuff is way too risky, thank God the contagion didn't spread the last time. Let's make sure it doesn't spread the next time, and we're going to do that by just making sure we cut you off from banking services. Do you have a sense of whether or not that's like fair or unfair? I mean, to be my perspective, I'm not defending this, is that I see their point, right? Like if $40 billion that contagion had gone to the banking sector, that would have caused real problems, right? And then we would have been in like an even worse situation with the economy. So what are your thoughts? Is that a fair thing for them to be doing or unfair thing?
A couple moving parts there. I guess first off, it doesn't surprise me that Operation 2.0 is happening right now. Like I said, the last 24 months we've had so much self internal stupidity. Like I said, Charles Hoskinson was raving about at the peak Doge mania. Like we've grown past this. That we are the nail that's sticking out the farthest is going to bite us in the ass down the road. It's not if when the regulation comes. We're just acting like children, etc. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that that's happening. But I would also say, is it that they're really, how do I word this? Are they really worried about the contagion from a standpoint that it's like almost like COVID, or is it that they know that their bridge isn't as sturdy as they think? Like, we were fractional reserve banking, like 2008 showed it. They have all this fun money floating around, and then '08 happens and the contagion spreads. Like we've talked about this, AIG was supposed to be an insurance company of like the insurance companies, and they were like one of the first freaking bailouts. So that just shows you how deep the contagion was with just the malpractice, just not actually having your books balanced, fractional reserves. And I forget the gentleman's name. I follow him on Twitter. This is embarrassing, but he puts a lot of threads out, and he had a really good one probably at the end of 2020 when we were kind of just digesting everything about like March, or at least like when like credit markets, everything seized up in March. When COVID like finally hit the world, hit the ground running. If you can make an argument that when pandemics happen, there's going to be a little crazy, but the fact that we had to print freaking $6 trillion in like credit markets, which are some of the most liquid asset markets in the world, the fact that they seized up as bad as it just shows how just and back to like I don't want to like go back to it, but the Peter Schiff and the Brent talk, they just said like we've been playing just fast and loose monopoly money since we got off the gold standard, and you just compound that over 50 years, and then March 2020 happens and people wonder why the global economy just hiccups and chokes again. It's because we have no underlying value and we're just passing around monopoly money. So I guess the reason I bring that up is I don't think they're necessarily concerned about the contagion from a standpoint of like for example, if you have a relationship with somebody as a friend and they start doing stuff that is affecting you mentally or like physically as a person, you separate yourself from them just to, it's not worth the negativity. I don't even think they're doing that. I just think they know that their underlying bill is just so trash that, again, crypto is a casino right now. You and I, everyone listening that's been in the space will admit that. But I think you take that casino, you mix it into the legacy financial system. I think they know the whole FDIC thing. It's just smoke and mirrors. So I think they want to separate themselves because if they start adopting and we start, shaking hands, not if when the next, crypto bull market mania blow up happens, they know the whole FDIC, it's all bark, it's no bite. So that's what I think they know their clown show and they don't want to add our clown show to their clown show. That's my initial perspective of it, or at least one off the top of my head. That's the first thing I was just thinking about.
So you're saying they want to segregate the clown shows. They want the clown shows to not intermingle, although you have clown squared.
I mean, but like honest though, like what do you think about that? Do you think like talking out of my ass, or do you think that like '08 and March 2020 just showed this whole FDIC fractional reserve shit? Like it doesn't work anymore. Like it's just obvious. There's just too much contagion. There's malpractice. Just can't balance basic books like shit you learn in your first semester at accounting school. Like I mean, do you think I'm talking shit, or you think there's kind of a point there?
No, I mean, I get your point. I think that they don't want this sort of bubble mania. So, here's the thing. Maybe this is how they're thinking about it is that, before the last bull market in crypto happened, the entire crypto market was something like, it started off, I think, with a crypto, a market cap of like 300 billion or something. It was nothing at all, right, in the grand scheme of things. And it got all the way up to $3 trillion. And I think what they're afraid of is that there's still so much bubble energy in the crypto markets that, well, if today it's 1 trillion, because I think that's where we're sitting, total market cap is 1 trillion, yeah, ballpark, that, all right, if it gets to 10 trillion and, the next bubble, and by that time, if banks are involved, then that's your next 2008 financial crisis right there. So I think that's where they're coming from. And I think that they themselves are like, listen, we need like either Congress to pass laws. We need some regulatory clarity. We need to know what the rules are here because, all of these things are blown up here and we just don't know like how do we mitigate risk in this market? Like everything is just sort of up in the air. I mean, the FTX was a great example, right? Of just people thinking this guy's a giant genius. And then the next thing you know, he turns out to be worse than Bernie Madoff. So I think where they're coming from is like, unless we have clarity, unless we know what the rules of the road are in this crypto market, we don't want banks involved because our economy already sucks. We already have a lot of issues with interest rates being high and the economy slowing down and, inflation is super high. You put all these things together and then you put crypto as, another additional icing on that cake. If the whole thing melts down and the crypto is just going to accelerate and worsen any sort of potential meltdown. So I think that's where they're coming from. I think that, if Congress or whatever passed, Congress or whoever passed some kind of a law that clarified, like what do we think about cryptocurrency? Is Ethereum a security? Is Bitcoin a security? How do all these things work? And then you have institutions, mature institutions putting money in and knowing exactly how to calculate the risk, right? Then it may be a different sort of ball game. But at this point, like you said, it's a crypto casino, and they don't want banks involved in a crypto casino when things are so bad in the, economy.
Do you think, I know like these statements, they're never like 100% yes or no, but do you think this Operation Choke Point, it could somewhat almost be a good thing, kind of like just like a scorched earth, they say if you take the island, burn the ship. I know we joke about this, but like when I was back home, family friends just chatting about crypto, and I would just talk with them even though like I'm still kind of on that $10,000 train, but that's a whole other thing. But I would be telling them, they're like, "Oh, you're still pretty calm and confident about it." I'm just like, "Well, yeah, this was kind of like our linchpin moment." They're like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Look at all the PPP and bailout money the last 36 months. Like, what do you mean?" I'm like, did some of that trickle into crypto? Yes, but like, please name me the AAA crypto companies that were bailed out, like the JP Morgans of the
Yeah.
world or the Air. And this is the thing, it's like we didn't get it. And to your point, we had the FTX, the three. I mean, we've named them at ad nauseum, like on the episodes. But like the fact that that between the $7 trillion fund money, just like that what's going on with the house and right now, all the internal stuff blowing up, Russia, Ukraine. To our point, the fact that like we're still sitting at $1 trillion in bitcoins, like whatever, $500 billion, like we took a lot of iron hits to the chin and we're still standing. So it's almost not that it would become a crutch, but maybe I would almost say, and obviously I'm biased on this, I would say that like if banks started kind of blindly just investing in crypto companies, I would say that the legacy financial virus would actually plague us instead of the reverse. And so that's kind of the thing. It's like they don't want us to play in their sandbox. Cool. Like we kind of have ours right now. Yeah, there's some dog shit and some spilled milk in the corner, but it's like we're having talks like this. We have meetups. Like we're trying to. I don't know about you. The last month or so on Twitter, I've definitely seen a lot of threads where I think people. It's been a couple months. New year. It's been 90 plus days since like the last little bit of the FTX fallout, etc. So I think people are digesting stuff. But I don't know about you, but I think a lot of people are getting real good clarity for 2023. So it's like back to my point, if the legacy finance doesn't want us to play in their sandbox, I think we have the right people, the right space, the right infrastructure to make our own sandbox, go into the next bull market. So I guess like what's your take on
Mm.
that too? It's like, do you think we got enough momentum
Well,
behind us where it's like we don't need this?
yeah, I mean that's a very good point. I mean, and it sort of comes back to the earlier thing I said that well, what happens if like there's other major countries in the world that decide that they're going to adopt Bitcoin, and start
Mm-hmm.
transacting in Bitcoin, then even if the big boys in America decide they don't want us to play in their sandbox, well then maybe a lot of this economic energy just moves offshore, and
Mm-hmm.
this becomes a monetary network that's used in countries like the Middle East. It's used in countries like in Africa, in South America, in Turkey, in places where their own monetary networks are sort of like crumbling. Turkey's inflation rates is sky high, and unfortunately, they just had this terrible earthquake where, what 60,000 people are, confirmed dead, and the
Mm-hmm.
economy is like, taken a massive step back just because of that. So yeah, I mean, maybe that's what happens. Maybe this is if the U.S. government, if the regulators, the U.S. government doesn't get its act together, maybe this entire operation moves offshore, and they're like, well, fuck you guys, like
Mm-hmm.
we're done. We don't want to play in your sandbox either. There's the entire world, right, that is available to suck up the rest of this monetary energy. And again, the sort of liquidity on Bitcoin is so thin right now that it doesn't require like some giant amount of money. We're
Mm-hmm.
not talking about like, you need $1 trillion to get into Bitcoin in order for the price to like, quadruple or something. I mean, the 100 billion, 200 billion of like liquidity into Bitcoin would cause the price to probably triple from here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a lot of money in the, sort of global scheme
Oh
of
man, it's a
things.
fart in the wind, yeah.
Yeah, it's very little. So who knows? I mean, you have a point. If this choke point doesn't choke point 2.0 doesn't like allow crypto to take a breath, to breathe at all, then maybe the whole operation moves offshore. A lot of people are doing that already. They're just moving offshore. They're going to Dubai, for example. A lot of them are going to the Middle East, for example, like I said. And maybe that's what. And I don't know if you heard about this, but Hong Kong is also um, going to like sort of legalize, and allow people to buy cryptocurrency over there. So that's something that they're starting to do as well. So China's sort of slowly getting back into the swing of things when it comes to cryptocurrency. That's another one of those things they didn't about face on. So maybe a lot of this energy moves over there, and then maybe unfortunately America plays catch up in 2 years' time when they realize that they they screwed the pooch. But unfortunately, I don't see any like regulations or Congress coming along and passing some law that makes sense. I don't see any sort of constructive discussions happening in the legislative bodies about this industry being better regulated. It's just the likes of Elizabeth Warren, just spewing her nonsense, from her podium, hand in hand with Gary Gensler. It's just it's like this gaslighting that they're doing. About cryptocurrency. They're equating Sam Bankman-Fried with Satoshi Nakamoto. It's like, well, Satoshi, Sam Bankman-Fried, pretty much the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you have a point. Maybe we don't need these guys at all. Like, fuck their sandbox, right? Is probably what you're getting at. By the way, have you heard of this whole Coinbase and their base layer that they came up with this new project called Base? Have you heard of that at all? Did you hear about that?
I might be like I might be thinking of some crack. Is this like their attempt at making like a ETF for like just like large consumers? Or am I thinking of something else?
ETF? No, not ETF. They're coming up with a layer 2 solution for Ethereum, right? So
Okay.
so like one of the problems that Ethereum has is just sort of scalability, right? How are you going to get millions and millions of transactions on Ethereum? And one of the potential solutions is something called rollups, which you take like a whole bunch of transactions and you combine them together through a layer 2 scaling solution called rollups. And one of the sort of stacks, developer stacks or sort of project stacks that you can use to create these rollup solutions is called Optimism. So they are using the Optimism stack to create rollup solutions for Ethereum. Okay, so in other words, they're creating a protocol that people can build dApps on and people can sort of interact with in order to be able to then in turn interact with Ethereum. So this is basically like giving an Ethereum, they're building an Ethereum layer 2 solution, to just put it in a nutshell, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the reason I bring all this up is because we've just been talking about regulation here. And this puts like the entire regulatory question in Coinbase in a very, I would say it puts them in a gray area, right? And the reason is that while they are coming up with this protocol, it's an open protocol, right? So anyone can use it. You don't need Coinbase. Well, you kind of need Coinbase's permission, but I'll get to that later. But it's an open protocol. It's open sourced, and you can build on top of it, and they will basically be a pipeline for you for Ethereum. Now it's open source and there's no token, right? So they're not coming up with it. There's nothing to buy. Okay, there's no 100x going on here.
I was gonna say
So
that's a good start. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I don't think they have a choice. There's no way there can be a token. Otherwise, Gary would basically blow an aneurysm, on his desk if that happened. So so if there's no token, then there's definitely not a security concern, right? And it's an open source permissionless platform, so there isn't. It's not entirely permissionless, but we'll get to that later. But it's an open source platform anyone can build on. So Gary Gensler or the SEC can say, well, you're making money, security. Well, they don't have them on securities. But the problem is that what happens if I, for example, decide to trade some Ethereum-based token, right, that Gary Gensler does think is a security, and I'm using Coinbase's base protocol to do it, right? Well, now the Coinbase has enabled the trading of securities on this open, decentralized platform, right? So to what extent is Coinbase culpable, liable, for enabling that, right? And so that's going to then lead to this whole discussion of how liable is a platform creator for activities of a person on the platform. And I think Coinbase rolled the dice and like, well, fuck you, let's go find out in court. So this just rolled out about a week ago, a few days ago, and the SEC has been completely silent. Nothing has actually been said on this. And this a few weeks before this is when Kraken settled the SEC, and they settled because of that whole. I mean, we went over in the last podcast as well that Kraken basically settled because it was making a securities-like product for staking, and then Coinbase said, "Well, fuck you guys. We're not doing any kind of securities violations. If you think we are, we'll see you in court." Right? And then like a week later, they rolled this thing out. Right? So I think to some extent, Coinbase is getting a little sick and tired of waiting for permission, and they're just building it out. And it's going to be very interesting if the SEC has some objections to this. I think 100% is going to go to court. There is no way, because it's very defensible. Like Coinbase can say like, well, we haven't sold a security. We are creating an open source software that anybody can use. Now, it's not entirely decentralized, right? Because the initial validators, the sequencers, basically the people who take all the transactions, package them, and give them to the Ethereum blockchain, their sequencers. All those sequencers are going to be run initially by Coinbase, but their eventual goal is that this is going to be 100% decentralized. Coinbase will not control any sequencers at all. Eventually, they're just going to be supporting this new base ecosystem. Now, one of the other things you might want to know about is these sequencers take a fee. So if Coinbase runs any sequencers in the future, they will be making quite a lot of money for doing that as a service, because they'll basically be helping Ethereum scale. And then you have another issue about, well, is that a securities-like activity or not? But I think that's going to be a very interesting sort of a legal test case. I definitely very much like that Coinbase is at least pushing the envelope a little bit. I mean, it's not really pushing the envelope a ton, but it's better than they were before. Coinbase was really like, very timid in the past, right? They were like, oh, please don't sue us, please, we'll play nice, let us play, in crypto. And now, like Brian Armstrong said the other week, like sue us if you want, right? We're not selling securities. And now they do this. So I like it. I like this new empowered Brian Armstrong. I think he's like sick and tired of this whole thing. It's like, all right, fuck it. We just need to go ahead and build stuff and stop asking for permission all the time, especially when it's structured in such a way that it's very difficult to get them on securities violations, right? So we'll see what happens. It'll be very interesting because, as you know, the SEC is like throwing lawsuits left and right these days, right?
Yeah.
They're coming against Paxos, I think, over Binance stablecoin. And I forget, I think they've sued somebody else recently as well. They're just like doing this left and right.
I could be wrong here, and I'm going to butcher this because I'm obviously not a legal expert by any means. I think like the whole Ripple thing is like in stage 3 or something like that. That's like a never-ending zombie that keeps on limping with that.
I think that decision, I mean, the case has, been argued fully. There's no more like hearings. There's no more nothing. It's basically the case is done. And now the judge is we're just awaiting the judge to reveal her judgment, right? And, she's taking her sweet time, doing it. But I think it's going to be like this, I mean, at most this summer, because, the whole lawsuit took like, 2 years to like play out, right? That's done.
Yeah, a minute, yeah.
Yeah, now it's just the judge is going to like give a verdict. And, it's not going to take 2 years to render a verdict, right? I mean, once you're, done, the judge has to act in a reasonably timely manner. So I think Brad Garlinghouse, who's the CEO of Ripple, said that, and he said this a few months ago, that he expects the verdict to come out in some single number of digits of months, so like 3 to 4 or 5 months or whatever, right? And he said that in January, I think, so, right? So my guess is like by summer, which is around the corner, we should have some information on Ripple. That, by the way, might be a huge catalyst because the SEC has never lost a legal case, ever. And if they lose this one, this is a great big precedent. And suddenly, all of these crypto companies are like, all right, let's lawyer up.
That's why I bring it up. I am not a fan of Ripple. I do not want to call it vaporware, but I just think that I've ad nauseum said this. The legacy financial system has so many issues. Teaming up with the banks, I think, could call it blah, blah, blah. But to your point, I am rooting for them in the standpoint that if the SEC gets kicked in the teeth, Amazon called it the gazelle effect. They wouldn't go for the biggest publisher when they were starting out, trying to get deals and eat up companies, etc. You go for number 8 or number 7, and then you get 6-5. By the time you get to 4 or 3, you have so much shockwave noise behind you that you can basically just settle a lot of the shit easier out of court because they know, okay, we're going to get our ass kicked anyway. Let's just get a bigger settle. So that's the thing. It's like if Ripple wins, Coinbase wins, even if there are projects or companies I do not like, they're going to be like, well, fuck it. If these two won, let's just throw our hat in the ring and see. And same thing. Then if you have 500 companies coming at the SEC, or like it's kind of like with speeding, it's like, hey, we're all speeding. Let's see who you can catch. Again, not saying that like that's going to cause some aggravation and provoking, and there's going to be some slight retaliation. But to your point too, COVID showed this. A lot of people would rather be controlled and free, and I think a lot of the crypto industry is like, what, we're trying to make a new revolution here. Why do you think the founding fathers asked for permission? It's like, why are we asking for permission to make the next bridge? So obviously, like we said, there's gonna be some weird fallout from that, but I'm with you. Take or leave Brian Armstrong. He's done some stuff I would question, for lack of a better word, in the last couple years, but I think you capped it pretty good. I do like how they're pushing back and just saying to hell with it. We have lawyers, you have lawyers, I'll see you in court.
Well, to pick up on your analogy, the founding fathers didn't ask for permission, and then they caused a war, right? And so
Well, that's
that's
yeah,
where that,
that's what I mean. Like whether
which they won.
yeah, yeah, we'll see if it's whether a war or it's just a long drawn out battle. But yeah, like as you beat me to the punch. Like as I was saying that, I was like, well, they didn't ask for permission, but it was a war, so it's but same thing. It's like it, they spilled some tea and a little bit of blood, and they not unfortunately really didn't receive the fruits of their labors. But 300 years later, basically 250, whatever, we're having this conversation now, and it's like we're a superpower house of the world. Obviously, we have our issues, but it's like same thing too. Maybe right now, a lot of this Ripple, Coinbase, as it seems fluff and frivolous, but it's like 6 years down the road, we'll be like, oh, these like imagine if we didn't have these fights. Imagine if Brian Armstrong did, like, you know what I'm saying? So it's right now, some of this stuff might seem frivolous, but it's like, grains of sand make a heap, so it's like 6 years down the road. It's like, wow, what if Brian and, Ripple take or leave it? What if they actually didn't, stick up? Like, would we even be here right now? So it's, but
Yeah.
no, I think you said it. I think it's good they're pushing back because it's, same thing too, if you never ask, the door won't be open. So sometimes you just got to kick it open yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I am very curious to see how I think the Ripple case, I've been ignoring it for a while, but you made me think about this a little bit. Like, if they end up winning, and there's a lot of people who are pretty optimistic, like, about because, the whole argument was in public, and I think Coinbase also, ingratiated themselves in a lawsuit, and they said that they were I forget what the legal term was, that they were like an affected party in the lawsuit. In other words, like they themselves own XRP, and they're like, well, we also would want to register as aggrieved parties against the SEC, and I think a bunch of people did that as well. I haven't been thinking about it because Ukraine, China, inflation, the Fed rate. I mean, all this
So
other
much,
stuff is
yeah.
but at the same time, like if this case is settled in Ripple's favor, that would really have no pun intended ripple effects in the crypto market and the idea of like what it means to be a security, right? So it's going to be very interesting to see if it is ruled in Ripple's favor, what exactly is the legal argument that's being stated, So, I mean, just sort of thinking out loud here, if the judge says, well, maybe it was a security, but then the SEC waited too long, and if they wait too long, then like they forfeited the right to legislate. I'm just making shit up. I have no idea if that's even makes any sense at all. Or if they say, well, if it's sufficiently decentralized, and this is how we're measuring decentralization, then it's not a security. But then, at the same time, everything is centralized to start with, So does that mean that you have to have a window of time to get to decentralization, and then you can say it's not a security? I mean, there's all of these sort of if it's settled in Ripple's favor. I mean, of course, if it's not settled, then all of this just goes straight back to the SEC. But if it's settled in Ripple's favor, I think it's going to be very important to think about what exactly is the argument that the judge is using to say that it's not a security. Is that the SEC waited too long? Is it, it's, a decentralization argument? What is it exactly, right? And that would, of course, have a lot of effects on other cryptocurrencies that may also share the same characteristics as XRP does, right? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's an age thing, maybe it's a centralization degree thing, maybe whatever it is, or maybe they will say, well, Ripple or XRP communicated multiple times with the SEC, and the SEC never said anything, so now they can go fuck themselves, right? So is it a measure of communicating? Is it a measure of being public enough? I have no idea, but yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have. I like myself. I'm saying a lot of people. I myself have kind of been asleep at the wheel at the whole case. But now that you made me think about it, this could actually be, if it's settled in Ripple's case, a impetus for the start of the next bull market, because a lot of these institutions are waiting on the sidelines, waiting for clarity.
Mm-hmm.
What are the rules here? And if the judge rules something, and that ruling means that, well, Ethereum is definitely not a security, and XYZ is not a security, and this other one's not a security based on the criteria that the judge comes up with. Because let's remind ourselves here, the whole securities law was never passed in Congress. It was a Supreme Court decision, right? So like a lot of things in this country, like gay rights, for example, wasn't legalized by Congress. It was a Supreme Court decision, right? This thing too, the securities law was like a Supreme Court decision. This again might be another thing where it's some federal judge that's deciding like how cryptocurrencies are going to be treated as securities or not securities based on the opinion that she writes, which is a very odd way of doing business, but this is the America we live in today.
Yeah.
So if that's what happens, and then we find out that all these other tokens are not securities as well. I think you'll start to see a lot of money moving in, and it'll be moving in, maybe because people think, well, the biggest alpha right now is in crypto. It's not going to be real estate. It's not going to be commodities. It's not going to be like whatever, because all of those things are kind of played. It's not going to be Google or Alphabet or Facebook or Netflix, because those things are sort of all played out. The next big horse to ride on is crypto. So a lot of these hedge funds that are looking for some alpha were like, well, fuck, we finally got clarity and the market has been beaten down. Let's go back into crypto. So that might be the trigger for the next bull run, to be honest. And, it's sort of like falls into the whole stock to flow ratio and like the whole, like, all of the, indicators saying that we've already bottomed and we should just be going up now. And maybe the ripple is the catalyst. Maybe I'm just daydreaming and I'm wishful thinking, but hell, a man can dream.
I hear that. Yeah, I guess I don't know, like a little closing thing. I know these like statements always kind of suck, but same thing too. I was seeing some tweets by people. They're like, okay, not saying he's right, but to your points, Plan B stock to flow is back on track. There's a lot of depending on what you look and like which what do you want to call it? I guess like derivatives you look at. Some of the moving averages we basically crossed over again, which is like when you cross under, you're like in a death thing, and then when you cross back, you're kind of like you said, safety going sideways. But are you? I guess like let's just say like just between now and the start of the summer, are you like optimistic on anything, especially crypto? Negative? It's just still sideways. No one knows their hand from their ass. Anything personal, or you're just like day to day, and like you said, you're just seeing.
Yeah, I don't know, man. We had this rally in January up to mid February, and then things sort of petered out. But that's like market wide. It's not crypto specific, right? So like the Nasdaq is down and the S&P is down and Bitcoin is down a little bit. It's actually not down that much. I think it's like 23,000 today or something, whatever it
Yeah,
is.
it's like 4% on the week or something like that. Like for us,
Yeah,
that's
so it's not
nothing.
bad at
Yeah.
all. It's not bad at all for us. Yeah. So I have no idea. I am not foolish enough to make predictions. Like we talked about many, many times in other episodes, my focus is just to stay busy and, keep paychecks coming in and, not care about like my crypto holdings because, I don't need them right now. I'm making money in other ways. That's sort of my survival strategy for the bear market, which I've been like putting into play for the last whatever number of months it's been since it's been 83 years, like that whole Titanic meme. It
No,
feels that way,
it
man.
really is though, man. Like I was telling like one buddy, man, because he was like, we were just talking about stuff about like slowing down, being more mindful and stuff. I'm like, well, you can get into
Good.
crypto, but it's kind of double-edged sword. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you lose your mind on a fucking daily basis with that stuff. I'm like, with that said, a week in crypto feels like 3 years. Like, this in a bull
It
market,
sure
man.
does.
Like, I mean,
It sure
especially now, but
does.
like in a bull market, man. Like, especially, I remember like May of I'm trying to think here, like May, June of 21, man, every week when we were going up like 5% daily, it's like those weeks felt like months, man, because it was just like up, up,
Dude,
up.
it's fucking roller coaster back then, man.
But,
Yeah, I remember we had like so many people come to our meetup group in the middle of the bull market. It was
yeah.
causing me some anxiety. I'm like,
Anxiety.
man, this is like too much people. I like it when the group is small. It's gonna blow up again where we have like a whole ton of people come to the
20
meetup
people
again.
again, yeah.
Yeah, which is fine, but I kind of like it when the bear market people come to the meetup groups because that just means that they're OGs and they're actually
Yeah.
just care about like the concept of it. And we weren't having, back then we were having people come and tell us about what was it, the Anchor Protocol, and oh no, it was the Olympus DAO thing. Remember, some guy came to the group and says, yeah, you buy this Ohm token. It was the Olympus DAO thing, and then you stake it and you get 14,000% APR. And I'm like, dude, that doesn't sound right. And he said, no, it's been going on like this for months. I'm like, yeah, but
Yeah.
that's still, that just doesn't sound sustainable to me. So yeah, the some of this stuff can get really crazy in the bull market. Hopefully, people learn their lessons and the monkey JPEGs don't like come back in full swing and The
I
whole
don't
like
think the NFTs will, but I think something else will take its place because like NFTs kind of had some similarities to the ICO bubble, but they were still their own separate thing. So it wouldn't surprise me if just some new, because same thing too. It's like this in the space, like people like Isaac, to them Bitcoin, like to most of the world, Bitcoin is super high speculation, high risk, high gain, which it is. But to people in our community, this like Bitcoin's boomer coin, man. It's like, wait, you only own Bitcoin, Ethereum, like where? But that's the thing. It's like I don't think it's if, or it's just what's going to be the next thing, like you said, for alpha, because externally to people, crypto, Ethereum, Polkadot, Cardano, that's their alpha. But for people in the industry, they're like, what the fuck? I can only get, let's call it on a month, 10% with a Bitcoin. Where's my 2 3x? So they're going to go third, second page of coin market cap. So that's like
they're
a
gonna
whole other,
buy Elon cum rocket.
it's something. Well, that's the thing I'm thinking about. It's like once we do get confirmation, which I think could still be 12 months from now, but like you said, who knows? Like 3 months from now, if this Ripple thing kicks through, we could be in our own bull market. But that's one thing. I guess we can get into later too, on another episode. But it's like what is going to be the next like catalyst to get us going? And then, like I said, once we do get that upward moment, what for me, my blinkers are just going to be on. I'm like, okay, what's ICOs, NFTs, like what's that third ringing bell, like copycat? But that's a whole thing in itself. But like you said, we got a good OG crew right now, so I'm enjoying the bear market. But like you said, I'm still on that 10K train. But like, well, there's so many moving parts in the world right now, and if this Ripple thing goes through, like for all we know, by June 1st, we're back in a bull market, and we have 20 people at radio. So who knows?
One of the things to always remember in this crypto thing, and not just crypto, just like the markets in general, and this is something I've noticed the last few weeks, is sentiment can change so
Oh
fast
yeah, yeah,
that like 1 week you're like, oh my god, it's Armageddon, and then like everything moves up by 5%, and then you go on CNBC and you have all
yeah,
these like jackasses saying, well, we're gonna avoid a recession, and like
yeah.
I'm very optimistic, and then then the market goes down, and you have a whole other parade of people coming saying, well, there's no way we're gonna like miss a recession, and I see it, the future is very bleak.
Yeah.
And I'm like, these guys are just like as reactionary as like just a bunch of school kids,
Yeah,
like
I was gonna
it's
say,
like they
yeah,
have no impulse
teenagers.
control. There's like literally reacting. They're wearing suits and they sound smart. They use all these this technical language, but I've listened to them so much. I'm like, you guys are just a bunch of monkeys. You have no more information or clue or expertise than anybody else.
Have you seen that meme? I don't know. It might have been around January, like right before, because like you said, like we were kind of going down. I don't know, mid-January we ticked up, had that like month gain, and then everything's sideways again. But it did the Twitter lapse a couple times because I saw it. So basically, it was like a bunch of like college kids, and it's raining and makeup's running. They're outside at a funeral. It's like it's just showing it to it. Like every day, it's like down 1%, down 2%, down 5.2%, and then it was like the fourth day, it's like up 0.01%. It's basically like that Project X scene. And like I was at work with a buddy on a lunch break, and I saw that, and I just started dying hysterically. He's like, "What?" And I showed it to him, and it went right. But he's like, "What is this?" And I just, like you said, I said, "Dude, like from Monday to Friday, like the financial markets, like you said, macroly, they'll go through." It's like someone that's in a psych ward. They'll go through 10 different phases of just like up, down. And I think you're kind of like me. That's why, like, even though, like, if someone just asked me, oh, where do I think we're a week from now? I'll give them like a soft pitch. But I'm like you. I just try to go macro because it kind of seems actually counterintuitive. But I think that's why, like, the Peter Schiffs, like Charlie Mungers, the Lynn Aldens of the world, like, it kind of seems counterintuitive. But I feel like the longer time frame you look at, you're actually more accurate because you do give yourself more wiggle room, which is why, like, a lot of people lose their ass on day trading because, like, if you're doing a 30-minute candlestick, you better know exactly what the hell you're doing. Where if you're doing a 30-day or 30-month, there's a ton of play and wiggle. And same thing, you have more time to think about your game plan, your exit and enter strategies. So yeah, I'm like you. That's one thing I've just found funny in the last 60 days. It's like going to the new year, everyone's like, everything's fucked, it's over, World War III, and then like 30 days ago, it's bull market, hyper Bitcoinization, and then the last 30 days have been quiet. But yeah, that's why I just wanted to ask you if you had any thoughts. I'm still in that 10K bandwagon, but I'm like you. I think between now and June is going to be a lot of pomp and circus. It's going to be hot, cold. So I'm just like you. I'm just like going to the meetups, working, enjoying myself, stacking what I can, and wherever the cards fall between now and June, they fall.
Exactly, man. And again, as always, on that optimistic note, I think we should call it.
That's a good one.
Great pod as always. Talk again in about a week or so.
No, definitely. Always appreciate it, Otto.
All right, man. I'll see you later.